Hey folks, so just a quick introduction. My name is Tyler Bell. I work with Capital One, where I've been with their open source office for just over 2 years. I've had about 5 years in the financial services and technology industry. Prior to that, I spent some time in engineering and manufacturing. That's where my education is from, my first few years professional experience. And speaking with me today, despite his name not being on the door, is Ragha Vema.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ragha Vema. I'm a developer at Capital One. It's been around 5 years. I've joined Capital One, and prior to that, I've been developing software for various industries, banking, financial sector, automobile, loyalty sector. So I've been developer all over around. But yeah, the journey with Capital One has been really nice because we're going to go over in a bit. And how many of you over here have Capital One credit cards in your wallet?
Woo.
Oh, woo.
What's in your wallet?
That's good. All right. Capital One, being a credit card company and a financial service company, we deal with a lot of customer accounts, and we have like millions of customer data, accounts. And we also do it, we have to do it, we have to comply with the regulators. And we are one of the largest digital banks in the United States. And we started roughly around 25 years is roughly from when we went public. So considering this, we consider ourselves to be a startup in the financial sector. And our closest competitor is like at least 100 years old. And oops, sorry. And since we consider, since we are like a startup in the financial industry, we consider ourselves with a different DNA. We build our own software. We have like 80,000 engineers. So, and when we build our software, we focus on using the open source technologies. Reason being, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. The open source technologies has been used, and I'm sure like pretty much everybody over here uses open source technologies for your development. Can you raise a hand if you don't use? That's good. That's why we are here. All right. And being a financial institution, this might be contrary, but we build our software on public cloud. How many of you over here build your software on public cloud? That's good. Yeah. And our development is primarily focused on microservice-based architecture, which means we build discrete components which are independent of their functionalities, and that way, we give ownership of the components to teams, and that kind of gives them ownership, and then it's easy to maintain and develop. And being a financial institution, we are bound by regulators, so we focus on Devops Sec, which is like Devops with security and continuous delivery. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
So as Ragha talked a little bit about it, we're doing a lot of cool things, but it wasn't always like this. It wasn't until about 2013 where leadership from the top down took an approach to a digital transformation. And basically said, we want to be thought of more of as a tech company, which I'm sure you've probably heard a lot of people talk about, changing their image and really being a leader in financial services as far as technology and tech transformation. So in 2013, we came out with a few technical declarations. The first one to be attracting technical talent. So in the past, we had outsourced all of our software development. And the start of this digital transformation had to start with people first. So attracting good, strong technical talent to Capital One as full-time employees. Working in Agile, at this point, it's such a common trend. But at the time in financial services, we were one of the first groups really dedicated to being Agile and delivering software faster and changing our culture. Embracing a DevOps culture as well, just as in the first steps of this, as we're bringing people in. While they're fresh, why not have fresh best practices in our software delivery? And then, as Ragha mentioned as well, going to microservices, but specifically just starting with using APIs everywhere before changing all of our architecture. 2015 came around, and that's when we had our open source imperative. So building on top of open source software, going open source first, not reinventing the wheel. Using free software, instead of proprietary software where we can and where we can safely do it with minimal risk. But in addition to that, not just using open source software, but being a contributor to the community. That meaning, launching projects and contributing code back to other projects as well. And then also going to the public cloud. So we are also on the public cloud. In 2015 is when we officially decided to start putting some of our applications on cloud. And then as we progress through the years, that being a really aggressive goal with the thousands of applications that Capital One has, it's been an ongoing journey to go all in on the public cloud. Also doubling down on the APIs to create microservices architecture in the 2016-2017 timeframe, and then getting to fully automated, fully tested deployments as well as part of our DevOps journey. And from 2018 on to today, a lot of it's been about a cultural shift. The idea of you build it, you own it. So if you develop this thing, you're responsible for testing it as a team, as a product team. You're responsible for the operations, the QA, the deployment. Just having that sense of accountability on one single team, minimizing handshakes, trade-offs. So, anytime that you try to go through any transformation, be it digital or otherwise, and you're spending, time, effort, money, resources on these changes, you have to know your numbers. You have to have numbers to back up your success story, right? Or at least to have a goal to work towards. So with our Agile journey, it was, I don't want to say it's easy, but there's some manual ways to look at it, right? So you can look at all of your teams and say, are you adhering to the Agile Manifesto, first of all, as a first step? Do you have a dedicated Scrum Master or facilitator on each of your teams? And then also pulling some delivery metrics as well from tools that were already out there. So are you guys familiar with tools like Jira or Rally or your Agile user stories? Show of hands. So these tools were out there, right? So it was sort of low-hanging fruit for us to pull some of this information. And just by doing, a quick, spell check on these, you can see that we were working in Agile. Similarly, with open source, as I mentioned, building on open source, using open source, we could check and see out of all of our applications, how many of them have at least one open source library within their project, right? And that's a quick checkbox for us. Releasing projects to the development community. We validate that by just going to our GitHub, and you can see the 30 projects that we have there that folks we produce in Capital One and release to the world for their external contribution. And lastly, contributing to outside external projects part of BAU for our engineers at the company. So it's not to say that all of our engineers spend a large portion of their day contributing to projects, but we are proud to be involved in several software foundations. For example, we have a number of engineers that contribute to projects in the Apache Software Foundation and other similar foundations as well. So looking at what we're doing here, it was easy to say, yes, we are embracing an open source first mindset. Where things got a little bit tricky, though, in validating our transformation is in the DevOps space, right? So you're talking about a cultural change, but also a massive tooling change. And this is a little bit more difficult to validate. So taking sort of a high-level approach and looking at DevOps, why do we do it? And I mentioned earlier that I come from a manufacturing background. That means that I'm a little bit obsessed with Lean Six Sigma, cutting waste where you can, and process improvement, right? And it's amazing the correlation you can make between the manufacturing industry and the IT software delivery industry, which we don't need to go into all detail today. But at the highest level, think about increased operational efficiency. The reduction of handoffs when you don't have to take your code and constantly move from team to team to team, each being responsible for a different function of delivering software, right? So at a high level, that makes sense. Quality improvements, right? So when you're releasing smaller, releasing faster, you have better code quality checks, et cetera. This is ultimately leading to a better product at the end of the day. But how do we check that, right? And lastly, reduce time to market. So we talk about always wanting to be faster, but how fast should we be going? How fast can we go, with the kind of regulations that we have on us as a large financial institution? So these are all challenges that we were facing, right? And we didn't really have much of a way to validate this quickly.
All right, I'm assuming many of the folks in the room are developers. What is the release frequency in an average? Like, how frequently do you release features into production? Daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly? No, I don't want to hear that. All right, so a developer's dream is like, you build your code and you want that to go to production as fast as possible, right? Like you don't want to build it today and then 6 months down the lane, it goes into production and then you see, hey, this is not what I coded. And maybe in the last 6 months, somebody else has modified it or God knows whatever happened, or maybe something else changed altogether, right? So as soon as you build it, and you have to go to production. That's the ideal thing. So we just want to show that in the picture, like say, like, we want this, but again, we are in the financial industry, so we are bound by regulators. So we don't want to crash, right? We don't want to crash, or we don't want to get caught by the cops, or like whatever. So so all these things, to satisfy this, we need to release frequently, and at the same time, we want to stay compliant so that we are bound by the regulators. So what is the solution for this? How many of the folks in the room use like a pipeline for your release management? Okay, that's good. All right. So Capital One, just like all of you folks, came up with a pipeline implementing like 16 gates, which is like the controls we put in place, which means like, I'll just go over, oops, yeah. So the source code has to be from like some kind of like a source code repository, not from somebody's laptop or some kind of a desktop. And then branching strategy. How many of you folks use like a branch, anything other than a trunk-based development? Okay. How long does your branch live? Pretty short? Maybe a few days?
Pretty short or should be short?
Should be short.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So we enforced trunk-based development in Capital One, and no branches need to stay longer. If it's something really long, then it doesn't work, because you've heard about like parallel pipelines, and it's kind of like they never merge. And if you want to merge, it's going to be a nightmare. So that's the reason we have enforced trunk-based development. And code coverage is pretty much like, what kind of like, how much of your source code is being covered by tests. Again, like writing software and writing tests, like if you have tests which cover like 20 or 30% of the code, then there's no point in having it tested, right? So it should have like a significantly high percentage of test coverage. And then static code analysis, it's basically tells how good your source code quality is. And then security analysis, how secure the source code you've built is. Open source scanning, make sure that like the libraries that you use are not bound by any kind of vulnerabilities or any kind of CVEs. Artifact management, the release artifacts, they are kept somewhere in like an artifact management, something like a Nexus or something of that sort, not in some kind of a box where if it goes, you can't retrieve. And then automated build, test, deployment, automated integration testing, automated performance testing, and then automatic provisioning of your infrastructure, and then rollbacks feature, facility to roll back in case like, you find some errors in an automated fashion, immutable servers, which is like you're unable to make any modifications once the server goes live in production. And once we have all these 13 measures, which the controls in place, you have the capability of creating your change orders in an automated fashion. And then once you have the change order, then you can, the pipeline should be capable of releasing features to production without causing any kind of like downtime. And then there should be a feature, the pipeline should be capable of turning any features like, using feature toggles, which are implemented within the source code. And there might be like, have you ever seen all these 16 controls? How many of you are familiar with these? That's good. And how many of you implement this? Okay, all right. So the ones who have not raised the hands, like what is preventing you from implementing the controls in your pipeline? Okay, we have a possible solution for that. And now that we have a pipeline, but how do we prove that we are delivering the software in a quality, fast, and secure manner? And the answer is Hygeia. Hygeia is our open source flagship product, which was developed 5 years back. And it's open source. It's one of the first open source initiatives developed at Capital One. And the beauty of Hygeia is the architecture is pretty simple. And at the glance, with Hygeia, you can create like dashboards with the configurable metrics, any metrics that your organization wants, like from the feature tools, like your SEM tools, like build tools. You can collect the data from all the tools that your organization has, and you will be able to show it in a visual manner. And we can also kind of show it in the pipeline visualization, which is basically all the visualization from your commit all the time it goes in, live into production. And since we have the data from all the tools, you have the capability to kind of aggregate it at the portfolio level as well as the executive level with drill down capabilities. And we also have the capability of gamification, which is like if you have like similar teams, you can kind of like do some kind of a gamification saying like team A is doing this well, team B does something bad, so we can do like comparison between the teams and find out like why team B is lagging from team A. And then since we have the data and we have built an analytical engine called Audit API, which kind of does some analysis on the data collected to kind of help with the release automation, which we'll talk a little bit. So any organization, if you look at, we've kind of like categorized this into the CI/CD tool. So we'll be having some kind of like a solution for feature, SCM, build, Jenkins or Circle CI, anything of the sort, deployment, either Jenkins or Urban Deploy, performance testing, some kind of like JMeter or homegrown, some kind of like CMDB solutions, and then some kind of, and Artifactory repository. So all these things, all these tools, they provide like separate views and separate, metrics and separate dashboards. Instead of going to each of these tools and looking at the metrics, what we do is we have capability of collecting the data from each of these tools because every tool exposes their data through APIs. So we built something called like the collectors. The collectors, all they do is they collect the data from each of these tools and then convert it into the canonical data model, which is supported by Hygeia. And since we collect the data and we don't want to expose the data directly from the database, we built the API layer, which is on top of the data. That way, we can use the visualization. And for visualization, we can get the data that's being collected by the collectors, or for the analytics, which is the audit API, to do like source control good checks, like if your source control has been peer reviewed, if the source control has been like if the code committer has not merged it, it's been merged by someone else, and then if there are no direct commits to your source code, like it has been through a branch or a fork or something of the sort, and then make sure that the source code has gone through the security scans. Being a financial company, we are bound by checks, so we have to comply with security. So we make sure that the software that's being built has gone through security analysis. At the same time, since we heavily use open source technologies, we make sure that there are no vulnerabilities, or the vulnerabilities are dispositioned and fixed. And we make sure that the source code that's being built has been undergone with tests and the checks, and make sure that the versions are accurate, and the version that goes to production has been deployed in an environment which is like prior to production, something of that sort. So all these things are taken care by the audit API, which is nothing but the analytical engine which runs checks on top of the data that's being collected by the collectors. So at the architecture level, if you, as I mentioned in the previous slide, all the data that we collect from the tools are collected by the collectors, and they go into the MongoDB. And we have the API layer, which sits on top of the database, and then which kind of gives you, which feeds the UI. And one thing which I want to talk about the collectors is most of the collectors that are built today they are like run in a batch mode, which is like on a scheduled basis. And again, we've also started pushing data in real time through like APIs, like webhooks and event-based data collection. So we've done that with GitHub, Jenkins, and Sonar. So anytime a build happens on Jenkins, the build metadata and all the pertinent data that's being part of the Jenkins build is pushed into Hygeia. The same thing with Sonar, like anytime a project undergoes a change and anytime a project has been scanned, the test results get pushed into Hygeia. So, all right. So here are some of the collectors that are already available. And can everyone see the list of tools that we support? And do you see any tools that are missing here? Yes, what tool is it? I'm sorry? Okay. And is it like, what kind of it? I'm not sure about that tool. All right, so with collectors, right, like the collectors can be built in any language. The idea is since we already have the canonical data model with Hygeia, the collector can be written in any language as long as it is able to talk to the API that's exposed by the tools. We get the metrics from it and then convert it into the canonical form to write it into the Hygeia. Then you want to talk. Yep.
Thank you.
And again, if we have like a reference implementation for each of the collectors, like for feature we already have like Jira, all those kind of things. If you find like a new feature tool that's not being mentioned, we can take this. I mean, you should be able to take the existing collectors as reference and then build on top of it. Or we have like open source community which can support it, in case like you don't find a reference implementation, or if you still like, if you can't follow the reference implementation, we are here to help.
So I'm going to walk us through a couple of views in Hygeia, starting with our team view. And as you kind of look at this, I want you to think about this as an information radiator at that product team level. So think about the kind of information that you're looking at when you're going through daily stand-ups, if you have those, or if you have a shared workspace, maybe something that could actually be shown on a monitor, et cetera. This is kind of the intent for this one. And if you look at the screen, you might notice that some of these metrics are similar, as they're pulled from some of the industry common tools. Like, for example, this first widget up on the top left is pulling information from Jira. You'll also see some information on commits, pulls, and issues from GitHub here on the lower left, where we can show information from Jenkins, static analysis, unit tests, open source scanning. We have collectors for all of these, right? And you can display this all on one dashboard. Now, this slide's a little busy just because we're pulling in a lot of tools, and this is a lot of stuff that we may look at from day to day, but this is completely configurable. So, on the chance that there are some tools that are not relevant for your pipeline, you don't have to display, blank graphs, et cetera, for them. But where they are useful, you can completely configure this to your own pipeline. So here's a code progression view. So basically what we're looking at here is timestamps for when code goes to each environment within your dev pipeline. So you can see basically the health of your CI/CD pipeline here, how long it's taken to deploy to dev, QA, integration tests, performance tests, and ultimately production. This is our cloud utilization and cost view. So we blanked out some of the data here just for the presentation purpose. But think about, the example for AWS, which happens to be our case, your EC2 instance utilization. What instances are up, what's in use, what is the cost, per a time period. And this is just a quick glance into there, so that you can just quickly see it. All that information consolidated together. And just a disclaimer here. So today we have this available for AWS. It is on our roadmap to expand to GCP and Azure as well. So that is on our roadmap if you guys are on cloud, but on a different platform. The next view we're going to show is the product dashboard. So we showed the team dashboard, that's sort of the micro level or the team focused view, right? Now let's say you're a delivery manager that is responsible for a number of applications, right? And you only care about some data for a number of applications. This is basically a roll-up view of the information that you'd see in the team board, and this is configurable as well. So we have each of our applications here. So Tetris is a separate application from Galaga and Pong, right? So this is just a quick glance. If you have a portfolio of applications that you want to check the data in, this is the next level up that you would want to view. Moving up one more layer here is our executive dashboard. So I want you to think about, your VP or your CIO. What kind of information is important to them? Obviously you're not going to go into a meeting with, the team dashboard view. I don't know many CIOs that, care how many stories, one or two people closed out in Jira that day. So you need some higher level information. Maybe there's an initiative to burn down some of your open source violations, or maybe there's, production incidents. You want to see, where are we in comparison to last year around this time? Where are we trending, up or down? What's our mean time to resolution for issues? And then if there are questions on these data points, we have a details tab. So going into that open source violation example, you can see the trending here and the burn down over time for those violations, should there be more questions. Let me ask, has anybody ever gone into a meeting with some accountable executive where you had to show a metric for something in your pipeline, and what you showed made them more confused than they were before you entered the room? Okay, I'm going to raise my hand because that was my life at one point for about 6 months at another gig I had. And it's really frustrating, right? Because you go through these constant manual pools of data from different sources of information, and you're not always sure whether or not what you're showing is going to be completely valuable, right? But the glory of the executive dashboard is it being configurable. You can have kind of a trial and error, or fast failure to figure out what's important to those stakeholders, and then you can use that information moving forward.
And when we spoke earlier about the gamification, so this is one screenshot of how we do the gamification. Again, the gamification is like totally configurable. Say in this case, like we have a dashboard which says like score of 1.8, which means like they have some they have the feature widget, they have the build widget, they have a code widget. At a nutshell, like the algorithm for calculating the score is based on like what widgets you have, and like say there could be a possibility that you have a widget configured but then you don't have any data to support it, or like your data is too less, or like your data is too old. So all these parameters, they can be configured through a properties file, and then you have there's a collector to kind of do the logic. And one classic example of the collaboration is since this feature was contributed by one of our organization, one of the organization, which is Walmart Labs. They have contributed this feature, and in a collaboration with Capital One. So again, like and then talking about the Hygeia accolades, in 2015, Hygeia was awarded the rookies, open source rookies of the award. And then there's like a classic example of how Walmart implemented 5,000 plus dashboards, using Hygeia. And then Hygeia has also been mentioned in like the 50 Devops tools that you probably might not be using. Anyone in the room are already using Hygeia? Okay, all right. So,
let me ask another question. On that collector slide that we showed, was there a lot of similarity between your tool set and the tool set that we have collectors for? Maybe 5 or more collectors? 10 or more?
10 or more, nice.
Okay, well hopefully by the end of this we can convince you to use Hygeia.
Yeah.
Low-hanging fruit for you guys.
Yeah, and the main thing about Hygeia is it's free of cost and it's open source. So there's no product in the market which kind of does all the features that me and Tyler went over in the last few minutes. So we would strongly recommend you to try Hygeia. Yeah.
Thanks. So as Ragha mentioned, we've had significant contributions from a number of companies. Walmart is one of those, as is Verizon. In that executive dashboard I showed, a number of the features there were actually contributed by Verizon. And this is just to say that, although Capital One does maintain this project, but we're very serious about having this be a community-driven project. And we've had a number of key players over the years that have had most contributions and most heavy usage of Hygeia within their companies. And I'll show those. So as I mentioned, Capital One, Walmart, and Verizon, also Single Stone Consulting is on our consortium, in addition to American Airlines. And this is always expanding. So as community manager for Hygeia, we're always open to conversations with folks who want to do a proof of concept or just to talk through Hygeia and how it might be of value to their company. So don't think of this as just a set consortium that's just us. We're always welcoming more people who are serious about getting involved and want to contribute back. This picture was actually taken this year back in June when our consortium met at our annual meeting at Verizon's headquarters. The purpose of that is just to take a look at where we are with the project today, what our roadmap is, what's most important to the members of the consortium feature-wise, and then just general members of the community. We've also established a number of working groups within that consortium. So we have our program management and technology innovation groups, in addition to our metrics and product management groups. So looking across all of the membership we have on the consortium and recruiting the SMEs in each of those areas to drive those respective functions for the project. And just to further drive home the balance of work we do internally on Hygeia to the kinds of contributions we're getting from community. So we have a lot of technical improvements that we're working on today. Ragha, namely, works on this day to day. But also, a lot of community contributions as far as features go. So executive dashboards has been sort of a hot feature for us lately. And we continue to get contributions from the consortium there. And then it's the other cool thing about the consortium and how they get involved is that people typically look at Capital One as the place to go for information on the project, but we're trying to spread that out more to everybody as a shared sense of accountability. So when somebody wants information, another member in our consortium can go out and walk them through a walking deck of the information on the project, how it might work for them, and work them through a POC as well. So it's not it's not Capital One's project alone. It's really our project as a consortium and a community. So again, if you're interested, please talk to us. We'll be at our booth down on the first floor to the right of registration. If you don't have a chance to really go in detail with us today about Hygeia, we're always active on Git or chat on the Hygeia project there. We're happy to offer support for you as you work through POCs or just need some general information. We have a GitHub organization for Hygeia as well. And I'll allow Ragha just to talk a little bit about that.
I'm sorry. So, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, so check us out on GitHub. Yep. And then if you have any questions about the project or repos, how they're set up, Ragha's going to be your guide there via Git or chat.
Yeah. All right. Now, quick Q. Any questions? Yep.
So the question was, what other tools did we consider before we decided to build our own? And so basically, in looking at this, we couldn't find any single specific tool that did what we needed it to do earlier on. So really, we did a lot of research, but there was no serious consideration in actually giving a full trial to any single product.
And again, in this process, we found out that like every tool that we use expose APIs to export the data. So we thought like rather than going into, one of the key things of Capital One is like build your own software. So in order to that, we found that like the tools are capable of giving the data. So why not we just query the tools to get the data and then start using it? Yes.
I'm sorry, can you speak up a little bit?
Can you speak up a little bit, sorry? Oh, okay. So I think your question was only the support. What is? Only AWS cloud is supported. Is that what your question is? Okay. So the view that we showed was for a cloud widget. So in case if you use AWS as your cloud provider, the view will provide like how your cloud utilization is. So it's just like an optional view, but the tool as such is, like infrastructure agnostic. You can be on-prem, it can be cloud. It's just like all we need is the tool needs to have access to the Hygeia needs to have access to the tools your organization uses. And again, Hygeia has to be, at this point, Hygeia has to be hosted internally within the organization. So I'm assuming if you open up the network and then all the security groups, all those kind of things, in order to maintain the communication with the tools, Hygeia will be able to communicate with the tools to gather the data and then come up with the visualization. Yeah. How do you do what? Sorry? Credentials? The credentials, the question was like, how do we manage credentials? The credentials are encrypted and stored in the database. Yes?
For your deployment pipelines, do you have deployment agents or are you using third-party agents?
So the question is like, for the deployment pipelines, do you use deployment agents or something? So the way we have done, there's a known use case of using with Jenkins. With Jenkins, there is a plugin that is built exclusively for Hygeia. Once the plugin is installed on the Jenkins masters, all the build data, anything that is, like the build data, the deploy data, they can be pushed to Hygeia on like an event basis. So as soon as the build happens, the deployment happens, the deployment data gets pushed into Hygeia. Yes, Jenkins for the agents, but again, as I said, that is one way, and the other way is like if you have something like a Circle CI, then we don't have a collector actively, but a collector can be written to query Circle CI to get the deployment information, so that the collector will put it into the canonical data form which Hygeia supports. What, sorry? You deploy, Excel deploy, yes. There is a collector, you're talking about the support for Excel deploy. Yes, there is a collector, yeah. Okay. It was from a community, it was a community contribution. So at least I do not have insight on the Excel deploy. We don't use Excel deploy. Yeah, the collector slide which was shown is like all the collectors that we we support, and some of them were built by Capital One, which are used by Capital One and other folks. There are a lot, quite amount of collectors which was contributed by the community, either individually or at the organization level.
Gentleman with the hat.
Yeah, sorry. So the question was like, what kind of deployment strategy we use. So it's a combination of blue, green, canary. It's case by case basis. So Hygeia, if you look at the features of Hygeia, Hygeia is more about the data collection, the tool data collection. It's not about make decisions. So it kind of like it's data collection, analysis on top of the data that's being collected, and provide you a status which says like, hey, I'm ready to do this. So basically, the switch basically has to be done externally. You can probably use a homegrown tool or some kind of like an already existing tool to perform those actions. But the way Hygeia comes into the picture is it will give you the ability to say like, hey, go forward or go back. It helps you make the decision.
So I think we're at time here, but again, I invite you guys, if you have additional questions or just want to chat with us, come visit our booth down on first floor to the right of registration, and thank you everybody so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.